Hey, welcome back to another episode of The Warrior Spirit, the show where the inner warrior shines in their light. Brought to you by Praxis 33, the company that aligns your thoughts, goals, and actions to create your best life. I'm your host, Daryl Snow. Today, we're going to be talking to some fathers out there. Parents often are, when people talk about parental issues, a lot of times they talk about it from the mom side. And today, we're going to talk about it from the dad side. I have Michael Fineman. Michael is the founder of DadLink. It's an organization that's designed to empower fathers to develop a stronger and more intentional relationship with their children of all ages. And we just are grateful for you, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Good to meet you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And DadLink, that's an interesting name for the company. Can you explain the name?
Yeah. Daryl, the link that connects family to God is the dad, right? It's the father in heaven to the father in the family to the family. And statistically, it shows that if the father goes to church, the family is somewhere around 70% more likely to go to church. If the mother goes, it's about 15%.
Oh
So
wow,
that's where the link part came in.
that, that's a definite discrepancy.
Yeah.
Um, where did you get your start as I know that you're a father first. You're also a faith-based motivational speaker. You know bring people on this transformational journey. But first and foremost, you're a father. But where did you begin when you were the son? Where did your beginnings come?
Yeah, man. I have been in business most of my life, been in sales, marketing, business development, things of that nature. But I've always been an encourager. And uh, one of my favorite people to listen to was Les Brown. I love Les Brown. I used to listen to him all the time. So I met somebody as I was starting to kind of make videos, and I knew that I had a calling to help other fathers because I had experienced and overcome so much in fatherhood through divorce and through lots of things that I'm sure we'll discuss today. And I had the opportunity to meet Les Brown on the phone. And I connected with him. We made a great connection. We actually ended up starting a company together called the Les Brown Prodigy Program. And when I told my friends, hey, I connected with Les Brown, I'm going to work with him, I was so excited. And they said, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm like, no, 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 you don't understand. This is Les Brown. I'm so excited. I love this guy. They're like, yeah, this makes sense. You're our Les Brown.
Yeah,
You're the guy around us that's our Les Brown. So to us, this makes perfect sense. And so
that's
that really drove me. And when I met with Les, he's the probably one of the best encouragers I've ever met in my life. And in our meeting when we were starting the business, he said, I think we're here for you. I don't think we're here for me at all. And so that was really cool. And he just kind of lifted me up and gave me the confidence to move forward, and not even knowing with what I was developing with him that I would be coaching with him. And we had several thousand students in a course that we were coaching together, and it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I told you off camera, I had always wanted to meet Zig Ziglar. He was the first in the
Yeah.
personal development space.
Yeah.
Les
He's
was
great.
around at that same time. So Zig and Les were two big influences on my personal development arc. And it's kind of cool for me because now I'm friends with someone who worked 20 years directly with Zig Ziglar and now someone who worked directly with Les Brown. So
That's what you're
I
telling me.
get to
That's
geek
so
out a little
cool.
bit on the idle side.
I love it. I mean, I love that world of self-help, but when you bring it to the truth and the bottom line of wisdom and where all of this self-help kind of training comes from, it's all biblical. And so when you really realize that and give credit where credit's due, it's pretty easy to flow in this, in my mind, for me anyway.
Well, what's interesting about your journey is that you were not like a lot of people who come into a Christ-centered or a Christ-based field come from it from the standpoint of Christianity was the doctrination of their household. It was how they
Yep.
were raised. You weren't raised in a Catholic or a Christian type household, were you?
No, I was born and raised Jewish, actually. And it's funny. I would often say I became a believer later when I found him, and then I always correct myself and say, yeah, when he found me. And yeah, coming from Judaism, which is very religious, rule driven type, you know, religion, and then coming into the freedom of understanding who Jesus is and following him and becoming a follower of him. People want to put you in a box. Oh, are you non-denominational? Are you Baptist? Are you this? Like, no, I'm just Jesus. I just follow Jesus. I'm just a guy who loves to follow him, and what I believe in is him. And people short circuit, even in the Christian community. They really want to put it in a box. But I don't, I'm not a religion guy. I'm a Jesus guy. And a lot of people would agree and a lot of people would disagree that there needs to be some sort of strict doctrine. But the word of God is the word of God. And so I just follow that. And it makes it easy for me, man. Daryl, it's a breeze for me to walk in that because I came from what, Judaism was and how strict it was.
So, where did you actually grow up, and what was a childhood like in a Jewish faith? I'm not Jewish myself, so I'm not familiar with that. What was that kind of childhood like?
So I grew up a little bit different. I really wasn't in my home most of my life. I was in boarding schools from 7 to 15, different places, different schools, and different institutions and things like that. So, I grew up around Judaism. I went to synagogue some, but I wasn't really heavy into it. And at the time, my family was a little bit more what you would call reformed rather than conservative. And with that, we focused more on the holidays and Sabbath and things like that. So I understood it. And then when it came time for my bar mitzvah, I actually had mono, and I was studying the portion that I was to read in the Torah, which is what happens when you're 13, and go through your bar mitzvah. But I was sleeping all of the time, and my parents were really mad at me and thought I was being lazy, and kind of cut it down from this big event to a little event. And then at the end of the bar mitzvah, when we went home for my party, I went to bed. And they went, wait a minute, something must be wrong. And we found out I had mono the whole time. So for me, the experience of Judaism and synagogue and all of those things was not very positive, honestly. I was part of USY, which is United Synagogue Youth Group. I was trying to connect, but I never felt the presence of God. I never understood that you could have a relationship with God. And so it was just a very different upbringing. Although I love the culture, I love the memories, I love all of the traditions, I love the people. I mean, Jews are just some of the most loving, close knit, unafraid to be themselves and show emotion, a group of people that I've probably ever been connected to. And so I consider myself a completed Jew because I never want to lose that connection. And I also consider myself to have the double blessing because I'm Jewish and I'm a believer and I follow Jesus. So I really feel like that's been a huge benefit to me.
When did you um I don't want to say reform or convert. I don't know the right word, which is bad
Yeah.
for a wordsmith to not find the right word. Um,
Yeah.
when when did you like? Was there a dark period between your hallways of Judaism and your connection with Christ, and or did you just go right from one to the other?
No, there was a gap. There was many years when I just didn't pay attention to God at all. And I was on my own at 15 years old. I had my own place. I was in high school. I was working. Um, and it wasn't till about 15 years later when I married my son's mother, and she had converted to Judaism, but I think she did that more to just assimilate with my parents. And we had the wedding, and then maybe a year into the marriage or a year and a half, she realized I don't really practice, and she wanted to go to church. She was a believer before and had converted. So I said, well, go ahead, have at it, but I'm not going. And so Sunday mornings they would go to church and I would go fishing in my boat, and it was pretty cool. I liked it actually. And then eventually she convinced me to at least come and try to support the kids in church. And I went to a place here that was a big non-denominational church, and it was pretty cool. Like they had it was almost like listening to a Les Brown. It was a very practical message, something I could apply to my life. I didn't understand the biblical part. I loved the worship music. That was fantastic. As somewhat of a musician myself, I really enjoyed that. And it wasn't so bad. I said, okay, I'll go sometimes. And that went to going all of the time. But I'll tell you, I went for 7 years before I gave my life to Christ. And the reason being is I was watching this walk of Christians that I could see that was so so filled with hypocrisy. And they were great Christian on Sunday morning, and the rest of the week, they were not even talking about God. And, I had a saying back then. I'd say, I could stand in my garage for 3 hours a week, but that does not make me a car. And I do not see any Christianity in you outside of church in this entire group. I see no reason to give my life to Christ, but I'll go for the kids. Eventually, it got a hold of me, and there was a pastor in South Carolina when we were living there that was just no holds barred. And this guy said, "Hey, I see your grip in the pew when I do the altar call." He's talking to the whole congregation. Get your butt out of the pew, get up here and get saved. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I just kind of went up there. And then we ended up having this big baptism party. And there was an overshadow of that day where my son's mom was not happy because it was on her birthday. And I thought she would be thrilled, but she was not. And so that kind of overshadowed it and muffled the whole experience. And so I became kind of a covert Christian again. I was a believer, but there was no big rush. I thought after 7 years, there would be a mighty rushing wind and a flame would be over my head, and this would be amazing. And it just didn't go like that.
Yeah,
You know.
there's a couple things. It's funny because when I was in my creative writing class in high school, I wrote an article or a paper. One of my papers was about how Christians, only go to church to be seen in their good clothes. They don't really go to
Mhm.
practice their religion. And I actually, somewhere we must have read the same little playbook, because I've always used that same car analogy, sitting in the car,
That's awesome.
sitting in the garage. But when people ask, why are you not a believer? The number one answer is because I've seen other Christians, and
Right.
they don't walk what they talk, or they do the Bible thumping preaching, which silences more ears than it opens, because they're thumping it so hard and they're not living it. So, but you also mentioned something that I think you kind of skated over. At 15, you were on your own. Now, most 15-year-olds are not on their own; they don't have their own apartment. So, did you
Right.
emancipate from your parents, and what caused that rift?
Yeah, we didn't have to legally emancipate, but they did allow me to do that. So growing up, I'll go back a little bit. My biological mother, passed away when I was 3, and she had a brain tumor for most of my life. And so my brother was a year and a half old when she passed. I was 3. And in that time period, she said to my father, I release you. Go find a mother for my boys. I know I'm leaving. And so my father, being a very practical guy, at 30 years old, loses his wife. She was 29. And of course, he mourned for quite some time. I'm sure. I don't remember as much because I was 3. But for the next couple of years, he was out dating. He was working. We had a nanny that was taking care of us. And I was kind of on my own. The nanny didn't really speak English. So there was looking back and now knowing what I know about children, that was a crucial time in my life when I just did not have the support I needed. And so when he married a woman who was had her own issues from childhood and was became very abusive and was very strict and was very, uh, you know, I don't know what the word is, but she was her type of discipline did not include love, and it was really tough on us. And so I started kind of pushing back, and then I was protecting myself when I was pushing back because became physically abusive, and found myself out of the home in an institution, and because I was the problem apparently. And children, when they're young, they can't communicate, and so they communicate through their behavior, as you well know. And this happens sometimes until they're adults or beyond if they haven't learned how to manage communication skills. And so I ended up in this school, and I just went from place to place to place. A place would say, to my parents, hey, he doesn't belong here. This is a good kid. And they would find another place that would take me. And this went over and over and over until I was 15. So at the age of 15, I'm in the judge's chambers with my father, and the judge looks at us and he says, you can't keep, I'm looking at the file, you can't just keep putting him from place to place. It's time to transition him back into the home. Well, I knew the system pretty well. I'd been in it most of my life. And I said, no, as soon as you send me home, Judge, I'll go AWOL. And if you take me back, I'll go AWOL again. Now, I knew that he couldn't place me if I said that. And so he said, well, what would you propose we do, young man? And I said, you know what? Put me in juvie. I'll do juvie until I'm 18, then I'll figure it out. And he just sat back in his chair. I'll never forget it. And he said, you would choose jail over going home. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, that's not going to happen. So he looks at my father and he says, we need other options. So one option as a Jew was go live in a kibbutz in Israel, but I knew I would have to go into the military shortly. I did not want to do that. I was not a guy that liked authority, as you can imagine, at that point.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the next option was I could go live with my grandmother down here, who was my biological mother's mom, but I was estranged from her during that time. My father had made a decision to keep her out of our lives. And looking back, I understand why he made that decision. And actually, I don't agree with the way he did it, but I understand why he did it. And it was a valid thought on his end because it was true what he was seeing and why he did that. Um, so I came to live with her. She had been widowed. I heard my dad say Palm Beach, your grandmother in Palm Beach. I'm like, cha-ching, I'm going to Palm Beach. Here we go. This is going to be awesome. And I came down here and she'd been widowed 20 years. She lived in a one bedroom apartment. She didn't like to turn on her air conditioner and she was really set in her ways. She had been a businesswoman most of her life, very strict, very, strong woman. And, but she melted when I got here. And she became the mom I never had. And she was amazing, unconditional love. I could do no wrong. She was awesome. And I would come home reeking of marijuana, and she would say, yeah, I better not smell what I think I smell. And I would say, you don't, what do we have to eat? you know, and she just loved me through that. But I was on top of her in this tiny little apartment, like really cramping her style and her lifestyle and everything. So, and also I had been somewhat what I thought was self-sufficient for many years. So I was ready. So my dad helped me pay for the efficiency that I rented. And I think he covered the whole thing, even though I was working. It was maybe 150 a month or something back then. And, but he helped me move. And I had a motorcycle, I was allowed to have a motorcycle. He didn't want me to have a car because he was afraid I would cause him a lot of, cost if I had a problem. But I was allowed to have a motorcycle. So I had motorcycles. I was in high school. And I got a couple jobs. I was working on the weekend. I was working during the week, pumping gas back then and moving furniture on the weekends and anything I could to stay afloat. I was in a rock and roll band, speed metal back then. But I always really kept my nose clean, even during that time. And so, yeah, it was a scary time looking back. Honestly, there were many nights that, I showed a brave face, but I was pretty fearful being alone at that age. It was hard. And I felt very lonely during those years.
You
And it
said
took me,
that, but you said that you said you kept your nose clean, but you were doing marijuana, which back then was like, today it's nothing. Back then it was like really, especially in a parental aspect. And then you were in a
yeah,
rock band, which
yeah.
just saying I'm a young kid in a rock band instantly leads to, okay, you weren't so clean, but
I
you
never
were.
went past marijuana. I didn't drink. Like, and I even, my friends would say, hey, let's party, let's get high. And I'd be like, no, it's Sunday night, man. I got to work tomorrow. I'm out. I'm going home. I got to get some rest. At 15, 16, I knew these things instinctively. Um, and, I think all of these schools that I was in, there were all these people that parented me. I always say, I wasn't home with my parents. I was out with 50 other parents that loved me, that taught me, that trained me, that spent time with me. And that eye to eye, one on one time with your parent is so important. I got it from probably 30, 40, 50 people. So I was
Now,
trained well.
but were most of those females who were mothering you, or were there some dad figures in there who were also fathering you?
Mostly dad figures because
Really?
they in those schools a lot of times either it was all boys or the boys and the girls were separated, And I had therapists that were female and things like that, but most of the staff members that were in my area were men.
That's fortunate. And again, if you, when we look back at the lives that we've lived, we can often, even if we're not a believer at the time that we're living those lives, or even have a close relationship with God, if we are a believer, we can always see the hand of God working when we go back and look.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
can weave His thread throughout our lives, whether we were acknowledging it or not. And just the fact that you had father figures instead of just mother figures really set the tone for who you are today and what you are, as far as a motivational, inspirational person who has also, created, the dad link. So
yeah.
this here, when you started this, was the uh, inspiration from this part of the fathering that you also got along the way? Did it play a
Yeah,
root in it?
absolutely. I mean, if you think about all of the wisdom that was poured into me over the years by all of these different fathers, I learned more fathering techniques, and I knew the things that impacted me greatly. I knew the things that impacted my peers greatly. I could see it. I knew the things that didn't work well. And of course, we have to do trial and error as dads. We make mistakes and hopefully we learn from them. But even with all of that training, my parenting style was that of my stepmother, who kind of ruled the roost at the house and inadvertently was discipline without love. I did not want that. I swore I would never do that, but sure as could be, I did. And I didn't mean to, but it was my natural reaction because boys are led. More is caught than is taught. So whoever's running the home, which should be the father, but in that case it was not, I followed what I was taught and I became what I was taught. I went back then, once I got conscious of that, to all of the training I got growing up in all of these places and started to glean from that and take notes on what changed my life, what was helpful, what was not helpful. There's a guy in there that taught me how to play guitar, spent time with me teaching me how to play guitar. He was amazing. There was another guy that used to get permission to take me home on the weekends because I didn't, most kids went home a lot. I didn't. And I just wasn't invited home. And so he would take me and he would show me the old uh, black and white movies of men, Humphrey Bogart and all that. And he would say, okay, aside from the lighting the cigarettes and slapping, this is how a man is supposed to treat a woman. And he would teach me about chivalry and being a gentleman and all of those things. Very, very specific training from him, which I then instilled into my son. And he probably doesn't know that. I wish I could tell him that today.
The thing that you said about not wanting to be what we grew up in, I relate to that, from the abusive relationship that I came out of. And I look back, I when I married my first wife, she had three children, and so I
Me
was an
too.
instant father. And I look back at those, like the 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 oldest daughter was 11, and she would often come and give me a hug. And instead of embracing this young child who just wanted a hug, my mind would instantly go, what does this person want from me? Like, what are they
Yeah.
trying to, what is it they're trying to, what do they want?
Yeah.
Right. And so I found, myself being a very angry father, and I was never abusive to my children like my mom was to me, but I was verbally angry all the time. And I look back at that relationship, and even though she and I divorced after 7 years, the youngest daughter was 2, and she's been my daughter ever since. She's now 26, and she and I are still father daughter relationship. And my middle child was a boy, and I look back at how hard I was on him mentally and verbally, and you know like he really wanted to play football. He was really good at football, but because he wouldn't practice at full tilt all the time, instead of encouraging him on how good he was, I would tell him how he'll never make it because he's not he's not giving his full effort, right?
Not doing what
And
you think you should
again, if I'd
do.
have had the healing part of me corrected like I do now, I wonder if maybe he would have went on to, instead of going into the Marine Corps, which destroyed his life, if he would have went on to college and played football because he would have had that love and encouragement of what he was passionate about. So, we do tend to parent the way we learn. And
Yep.
in part of that, as we heal, we need to also then remember that they were parenting from what they learned. And that's where some of the forgiveness for what, the abuse that I
Exactly.
suffered or you suffered maybe, can happen because we understand and we can forgive. Okay, they were only using the tools that were in their toolbox, and it was a
That's
shitty
right.
toolbox. So,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
uh,
our stories parallel. I didn't
very
realize,
much.
Daryl, how close they were. I did the same. I married a woman with three kids. They were 8, 9, and 11. The boy was the oldest. And I was not as hard on him, although I was demanding of him because he was brilliant, still is, and but he was a video gamer, and I was not allowed to play video games growing up. So I didn't like video games. I was kind of opposed to them. Instead of, but I was verbally abusive to all of them, like you said. I was just angry, and I was angry because I very shortly into the marriage I realized their mom had lied to me about so many things. I was just mad, and I should have left right then and there. It would have probably done us all better, but God has a better plan. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to divorce. I didn't want to do that. I figured we could work through this. But I married someone that was similar to my stepmom. And I think that, that's just kind of how it goes. I loved my kids. I wanted to give them everything I could, and I did. I was very selfless with them, but I was angry. And my girls, especially, they're teenage girls. They were kind of conniving a little bit. And I did not like that. I took that personally as an insult, and I blew up all the time. I learned the spirit of offense from my family, and some of them, unfortunately, still walk in that, where I was easily offended, and the kids offended me greatly, and I would take it out on them. And I never hit them physically, but I would do hard labor. I would make them do really difficult tasks when they screwed up. And it was harsh discipline. I didn't mean to. I honestly wanted the best for them. I honestly loved them. I didn't even really, it was just like you said, I wasn't healed. And their mom was not supportive. She undermined almost everything I did, which made it even worse because I was mad at her too. It was a mess. Um, and then we had a child. And looking back, that's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And my son and I, he's almost 18. We're so close. We have a very, very, very tight relationship. And the fruit that I see in him is the is what gave me the guts to step out and start doing this. I actually started with identity because I realized the reason I was that way as a parent is I did not know my identity. And if you think about, if you look back at my life and I was in all these different places and with all these different things, I really didn't know who I was. And I didn't know whose I was. And when I started to understand identity, I wanted to help young people with identity because we have this massive identity crisis and you can see it in the behavior of kids today. But as I was doing that, I created a program called Identity University. God redirected me in journaling one day and said, who sets the identity in the family? And I said, you do. I'm writing all this out. And no, who in the family sets identity? Oh, the father. And in fact, what he taught me is the father gives them their last name. He gives them their complete identity. He shows them where they came from and who they are and what they're supposed to be like. And I realized if I'm helping the youth, but I'm not helping the fathers, then I'm not doing the family any kind of service because I might help the youth, but they're still going to be the kind of father that their father was, naturally, unless they learn out of it. But if I help the father to shift gears, because at any point in life, the father can shift gears and get healed. I've learned that. And if I can help the father shift gears, change his filter of his father on the earth to the heavenly father, and change that filter in his mind and see the heavenly father as a perfect father and start to be molded by him and become a great father. If I can do that, well, then the kid's going to be healed by the father, which is the right way for that to happen. That's the right order. And then legacies will get changed, trajectories will get changed, and generationally things will change. You break chains. Amazing.
I can my father, my earthly father, uh, adopted my sister and I when when I was 10, when he married my
Mhm.
mother, and he is the most, or was, he passed, but he was the most integrous, honorable man. And some of the pillars that he installed in me, the integrity, the work ethic, the word is your bond, all of those things I have passed down to my children, and my current wife. I want to say only wife, because there's not a next one after that.
Yeah.
But my wife had a son, and he was 24 when I came into his life, and he calls me dad, and my daughter calls me dad, and we have this father son, daughter son relationship, even though there's no biology there. It's because
Yeah.
I have that embodiment of what a father is supposed to be. And even though they're now grown, our son is 30, he'll be 34, and my daughter's 26. They still call and they say, hey, what about this and this? And they'll ask for advice. Or even better, they'll want to come hang out on a Thursday night and just, have dinner. And when your grown
That's
children want to come back into your
yeah,
house and just
it's
hang with
amazing.
you, that's when you know you're doing it right.
That's right. That's the fruit. That's the
Yeah.
fruit. One of my best friends had that. His kids were so connected to him. And I met him in church. We were serving together in children's ministry, and I was doing worship, leading worship for the kids. And I asked him to mentor me. And he said, I'll pray about it. And he never got back to me. Now, knowing him now, that means the Lord said no. But that's just how he is. We're really close friends now. But his kids are all adults and they all live within a couple miles of the house. And, his daughter just got married and actually built an apartment onto the house with her new husband. And they're so thrilled to be there. I want that, and I learned this thing in a program I was in called JH Outback, which is an awesome weekend event. It's now called JC Wilderness in Palm Beach, and I love it. It's a different program, but similar, and I like it a lot. A lot of my friends are part of it. And I served there for a long time, but they taught something about parenthood in JH Outback. They said that you go from caregiver to cop to coach to consultant. I actually did a keynote on this. So as caregiver, they're infants. They need everything from you. You take care of them, you feed them, you change them, you guide them, you care for them, you protect them. As cop, now you're starting to give them a little bit of, they're running around, they're toddlers. Now you're giving them direction. Don't do this. You are allowed to do that, but you're not allowed to do this. Stop, too many cookies, that kind of thing. And then you become their coach when they're probably maybe 8 or 9. You start to become their coach, but not sorry, 8 or 9, around 12 or 13. And the reason that it's time to become their coach is because they'll be obedient when you say sit down. They'll sit down, but you can see the defiance in their eyes, and in their mind they're standing up with their chest puffed out in front of you, bucking up to you. But the truth is, it's just time to shift gears, and so you become their coach. And now, I had a conversation with my son. You're 13. In Judaism, that would mean that you were at the time of being a man. Your relationship now with God, that all the things I've taught you, your relationship with God is now your responsibility. I will still coach you, but it's time for you to take responsibility, and I'm going to be here to catch you. Don't worry about falling. You're going to, but I got you. I'll help you up. But the hardest part of that is as they start to grow, I would see a pit in front of him, and I would watch him walk right towards it. I would say, son, there's a pit in front of you. Don't go that way. And he would look back at me and he would keep going. And I would say, okay. And I would have to really quietly watch him fall into that pit. I coached him, I told him what not to do, but I could see on this thing he needed to learn on his own. He would fall in the pit. And I would come over to the pit and I would look down and I would say, I can't pull you out, but I'm going to teach you how to get out. And that's some of the hardest things to do as a dad, and why moms want to coddle their kids and not do this, because they don't have that the ability to be tough with their boys and girls with that way. So then you help them out. But if you do a good job of transitioning to coach when it's time, and you do a good job of coaching, you then get to be their consultant. And that's the stage you're in now. And that lasts forever. For the rest of their lives, when they're not sure what to do, they call you. And the beauty of that is, instead of going to their friends, which is the blind leading the blind, they're coming to someone with wisdom, with character, with integrity, like yourself, that can pour into them and guide them in the right way. And you know them so intimately, you pretty much know what's going to connect with them and what's not, and how to guide them and how to help them, and to remind them, remember when you were in this pit? Remember how you got out? Remember what you did? Okay, this is pretty close to that same scenario. You're just not seeing it from that direction. To be able to do that with your kids, man, that's the fruit of all the work that is required of being an intentional parent. And it's worth more than any riches on this planet in my mind.
I absolutely see the progression of those pillars, and I see the consultant area and where they're coming back now and asking for freely asking for the advice, you know. But
Yep.
you reminded me of a funny story of my daughter. She was, I don't know, 9 or 10 when I had divorced her mom, so it was my weekend to have her. And I have always taught my kids that everything you do has consequences. Some are good, some are bad, but everything you do has consequences.
That's right.
And so I had advised her to not ride her bike hands free on our road because it wasn't a smooth road and it was somewhat downhill. So I'm in the house, and I get a knock on the door, and this lady is bringing my child to me with blood on her arms and skinned up knees. And, I'm like, well, what happened? And she's like, well, I fell off my bike. And I'm like, okay, what were you going no handed? Well, yes. Okay. Are you anything broken? No. Okay, well, go back out and play. And the lady is yelling at me, aren't you going to take her to the hospital? Aren't you going to take her to the doctor? I'm like, no, I told her not to do what she did. She suffered her consequences. Nothing is broken. She learned her lesson and now she can go play again. What do you want me to do?
I love it. I love it. And we have that ability as dads to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's why there's supposed to be two parents. That's why there's supposed to be a mother and a father. And even in a divorce situation, you should be promoting the other parent being involved and allowing and engaging and making opportunity for the other parent to be involved, because they need both terribly, like
And
so
and
imperative.
in the divorce, because divorce is half of marriage in these days, probably even more these days.
It's in the 60% range
Yeah, that's horrible.
in the
But
church too.
even as horrible as my ex-wife was, I never de I never said bad words about her in front of the children when it was, my turn to have them.
Yeah,
She made her own life. They'll be old enough to eventually see it. I don't need to put my bias on them because they should still, if possible, have a relationship with their mother. So
yeah.
I never ever, and I think that's where people often make a mistake in divorce, is that they weaponize their children against the other parent. And I see this with one of my best friends. His ex-wife weaponizes their young children, and it really doesn't make for an amicable life for the kid or the parents.
Mm-mm.
I don't think that's
No.
the right tactic.
I wish, Daryl, that I was healed enough to do what you did, but I was not. I was still triggered by his mother consistently, and she was consistently doing things that were trying to alienate the two of us. And my son would come home and speak her words at me, and I would, project on him and scream at him when I was really screaming at her. And I had such a hard time during those years just trying to maintain. And but at you know when we got divorced, my with my stepkids, she was telling anyone who would listen a lot of things that were not true. And I just made a decision then. I said, Jesus didn't defend himself the whole time he went to the cross. He didn't say a word. I believe that my kids know me well enough to know that's not true, and I didn't say anything. That was a mistake because she said it so often and so much with no rebuttal from me that it became truth, and it was not truth. And it was a very character directed stuff that was hurtful and really damaged the relationship between my stepdaughters and I completely. And most of what was said was not true, and it really hurt me. So with my son, I decided I'm not doing that. I would speak against it, but it always came out angry and frustrated and loud. And, I was really just mad at her, and he had to hear it. And I wish I hadn't done that. We healed through that. I apologized. We've prayed through that. We've worked through that. We've talked through those days quite a bit just to, ensure that he understood that that's not okay for me to do. That was my behavior issues. That was things I should have controlled as a man. And I was allowing my emotions to drive me. I'd never been taught how to be a man, really. So what I didn't know is that my emotions are not supposed to drive me as a man. I am supposed to be more calm, cool, and collect and use wisdom rather than emotion. Women, have storms all day long and in their emotions. And as a man, to be in my masculine, this is something I was taught by a group called Warriors and Queens, which is an amazing organization. I am supposed to be able to be that rock during those storms and help her through her emotions. If I respond with emotion, then we just both go off the tracks. So I had to learn that with my son, and I wish I had done better. Now today, and at about 13 or 14, my son came to me one day and he said, "Dad, all of the things that my mom said about you aren't true. I see who you are as a man, and you're not what she said. You are what you said." He said, "But I didn't believe it, and I'm so sorry." And I was like, "Whoa, this kid's amazing!" Like it was incredible. And so that's what led to me apologizing, talking through all the times I was, screaming for no reason. I was angry. Now, during this whole time of being my son's dad, I had Crohn's disease, and I was pretty sick. And it ate up 85% of my bandwidth. Yet I still outperformed most of my peers. It was a very difficult time, and I still I'm not 100% healed physically, although spiritually I know that I am. But I was in pain, like 8 to 10 level of pain most days. And my son, had to go through that. And most of his childhood, I was sick. And I was helping him. I was doing all the things a dad could do, spending time, taking him out, playing with him. But we'd come home at 6:30. I was done. I would have to lay down for the rest of the night. I would give every ounce of energy I had, and then I would just lay there in pain. And he had to go through that, and he had to see a lot of things. But the healing that has happened between then and now, because I was open, because I was not trying to be prideful, because I was just very humble about it, and I came to him and apologized and was transparent about what happened as I was becoming really healed, changed everything for us. And I know that my ceiling will be his floor. He will be an amazing father because he will have all the things that I instilled in him without the anger. Because thank God he won't be in that pain either. And that was really difficult to manage as a single father. Very difficult. It
I
still is.
I think, and I'm sorry to interrupt that
No,
thing,
no.
but I think it's important that we also clarify it's not that men are not supposed to have their emotion or have other emotions like vulnerability and empathy and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But in those moments of emotional times, it's important that we are more solid and not adding. Emotion tends to add to chaos because calm solution seeking ends. It's all just about the emotion. So it's not that men are supposed to be emotionless. they're supposed to just manage them more than. I've always said that society only allows us one emotion as men, anger. That's the only one that they acknowledge. It's the only one they accept. It's the only one that they don't want to see it all the time.
Good point. No, it's
They,
a good
they
point.
don't they don't want it, but they acknowledge it. But if you have the empathy and the sympathy and the tears and the vulnerability, that gets downgraded by society, which is a shame because we're supposed to have full range of emotion. We're just supposed to
Yeah,
manage them, better than just letting the emotions manage us.
yeah.
Do you
And
agree
and in
with
a
that?
yeah, totally. In a relationship with a woman, we're going to have those emotions, but when our in order to be her rock, to allow her to be fully in her feminine, our masculine has to be able to just manage that and park those emotions for the moment to be able to help her through hers. Now, I think in a good marriage, you should be able to share those at another time when things are not stressful or chaotic. But during those times, we want as a society women to be in their feminine, and they're not right now, most of them. And the reason being is men are not being men. And so women don't feel safe. And so they step up into this masculine place that they're not supposed to be in to try to protect and guide their family. And there's so many single moms out there that have to do this. And that's why I created the program Boy Mom, where I'm helping moms kind of, you know, bring boys into men, which is not really possible, but it is if they use the tools of finding coaches to help their boys, finding men to mentor, because it takes a man to make a man. A woman just will never be able to do it. She can love her sons, she can bring them into successful lives, but to become a man, it takes another man to make a man. It just does. And so if you give them the tools and you give them permission to, hey, you don't need to be married. You don't have to have a boyfriend so that your boys have, a father figure. There's other ways to find them, but go find them and allow that and make room for that, make space for that. If their father isn't stepping up.
I think one of the things I look at my marriage now, I have taught her how to soften into her femininity again, and she's taught me how to be vulnerable without thinking that it's feminizing or demasculating me.
That's
So we've
healthy.
we've we've helped each other heal those old wounds that we brought to the table.
Yeah.
But it's because we do things through God and our faith, and we don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that you have to go to church to have that walk. We feel that we can find that in our own way, but it is a center of our focus.
Yeah.
We we know how much we've been blessed and how much our lives have been saved because of that hand of God that has weaved its way through both of our lives. And so we acknowledge that as, let's serve God first, and then we've healed each other through that along the way. So
Yeah.
um, you and I could probably talk for 6 more hours about all this stuff.
Easily,
Um,
dude. We have so much in common, so many parallels. But this is why guys like us step out and do these things, because we know how many men are hurting and how many men are silently suffering. And the suicide rates have gone through the roof, and it just gets to a point with some of us where we just say enough. I can't sit around and listen to the troubles without trying to make an impact or a difference or somehow bring some goodness to the world and speak to men and be vulnerable enough to come out and do things like this. Look, when we put ourselves out like this, Daryl, you open yourself up for all kinds of crap. I mean, even just trying to, I'm
yes,
involved in several Facebook groups and trying to help men. I've probably been called a simp more times than I can count, and I know where that comes from. That's from a guy that's really afraid,
yeah,
and when he's in fear like that, he's going to lash out. I know. I was that guy. I got it. I was that, tough guy, screw you. I'm not talking about my emotions for a long time. Even though I was very capable of going deep, I wouldn't because I didn't want to appear weak.
yeah.
Um, and I'm right there with you, man. Like We have to speak out. Men don't congregate like women do. I'm in a lot of men's Bible studies, so I tend to kind of go against that. But most men don't congregate with a bunch of men to talk about things that are hard.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you and I are doing this, and I'm glad that you're doing this in the show because we need to speak up.
Yeah, I think it's it's an important topic that will heal not only ourselves but others and society, and make that next generation not have to be as wounded going into their adulthood as we were. But as we're kind of coming to a close here, if there's someone out there, a man out there who's listening to you, whether they walk uh, tightly with Christ or just are walking kind of blindly on their own, they still want to be a good father and a good parent. What would be the one piece of advice you'd give that man who's listening to you right now?
Study the relationship between the Father and the Son. There was this reciprocal obedience. Well, obviously, Jesus was obedient to the Father, but Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father do. I only say what I hear my Father say. That's huge. And that what that does is that helps you realize that the wisdom that you need comes from this. There is wisdom in this book, and it will teach you. When people say there's no guidebook for being parents, that's not true. The guidebook is right here in the Word of God. I even if you're not a believer, there's wisdom in it. You're hearing teachings out in the world that are not giving credit where credit's due, but are biblical wisdom. And there is no wisdom like biblical wisdom. It is the wisdom of God. Rather than our little pea-sized brain, we can lean on the wisdom of the Lord. And I'm telling you, it will change your life. It doesn't mean you need to convert to Christianity, but there's freedom in that. And if you will study that word, you will find how to be a father.
I love your message. I'm going to ask you the final question that I ask all of my guests. What does a warrior spirit mean to Michael Feynman, or having a warrior spirit?
I think touching base on what we just said, it's being willing to stand up and talk about what you believe in and stand for what you believe in and not care what anybody else says. The only person that I care about on how they see me is my Father in heaven and my Son. I don't care what anyone else thinks of me. I know who I am. I know whose I am. And to be a warrior means to stand up for what you believe in and unashamedly be willing to step up and share the glory of God and the truth about who you are without fear of reproach.
Well, I appreciate that you are in my circle now, and getting to know you. It is amazing. The things that you do and the things that you are bringing to the table are definitely necessary, especially at this tumultuous time in our society.
Yeah,
Men stepping up to be men again and being fathers to their children is an important message for sure. So I
I
appreciate
agree.
you, and I thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate what you're doing too. It's great to spend time with you, and I look forward to more.
Thank you. And if you would like to connect with Michael, you can certainly do so on his website, thedadlink.com, or on his YouTube channel at the Dadlink Community. And as always, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of A Warrior Spirit. Be sure to hit that like or subscribe button so you catch all the episodes.